Team List Tuesday threw up some massive curveballs. Supercoach cash cows being dropped left, right, and center. So what do we do this week? Well, let's find out. Hey everyone, welcome back to A Man Talks NRL Supercoach. Today's video we're going through the round 6 trade targets. Hopefully you guys find some use out of this video as we go through different trade scenarios, the break evens of players, and the team fixtures for the next month or so. If you guys do like this video, would really appreciate a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel already if you haven't done so. My goal is to try to get to 500 subscribers by the State of Origin period, and if we can get to 1,000 by the end of the season, that would be absolutely amazing as well. And do follow me on Twitter as well if you want to hear my thoughts during the week, as I give some ideas on trades and also any news that comes up during the week. But let's get straight into the video. So I kind of wanted to format this one a little bit differently. Just looking online at, like, say, Twitter and on the forums, I'm seeing a lot of people really wanting to bolster up their center wings this round, especially with likes of Tesi Niu being dropped and Kurt Capewell kind of not really performing as to what people would expect. So I think a lot of people are also looking to consider round 13 playing centers, given that then those who are wanting to focus on their overall rank, round 13 is a crucial week, as that is the first week of buys. So getting players in who will play that week is really important, and we should start to think about that now. So this slide is really only showing centers who play round 13. There are obviously going to be some candidates who I won't be showing in here, such as guys from, like, say, the Roosters, like Daniel Tupou, Brett Morris. They won't be shown here, but obviously there's still good options to consider for center wing. I won't really talk about Brian To'o either. I think it's very clear that he's basically the number one center I think to go for. He's averaging an amazing basing power, and he's playing for the Panthers in round 13 and has a great draw coming up, so he's definitely the number one target. And Daine Laurie as well. Obviously he's very popular, cheapy center. He's performed really well and very consistent for us. And he also plays in round 13, so he's definitely someone I'd be holding in that time. With Tesi Niu being dropped and Kurt Capewell not really performing so well, these are definitely guys that I think people are starting to look at selling. Tesi Niu I understand more, given that he was dropped, that shows a lack of confidence in the coach in his performance. I thought he's been okay, definitely in attack, but he can be a bit of a liability in defense. Capewell just doesn't really seem to perform against the easier teams. He seems to always play a bit better against the tougher opponents. With the Panthers having a good draw coming up, he doesn't really have great base statistics either. He's got some attacking threat. I don't think I necessarily would look at him as more of a sell as compared to, say, a Tesi Niu. I think Capewell is still okay, but given that he's a second row forward in our centre wings, but he's still not really scoring that great, it is a bit of a concern, and he definitely isn't looking at the moment like a season-long hold. One player I haven't really discussed in detail as well is Bradman Best. So he's only just coming back from an injury, and the Knights draw coming up in the next month, so is not the best, pun intended, but he's definitely going to be someone who, over the round 13 period is going to be a great pickup. I think the Knights draw at that point in time does look quite good. But let's get into the other centers. The first group of guys I'll talk about will be the Titans boys. We've got Brian Kelly, Tyrone Peachey, and Corey Thompson. 3 guys who I think a lot of people are going to be considering to bring in to bolster their center wing. Of the 3, I'll just give my quick opinion. I think it would be Brian Kelly. So he hasn't really performed as well in terms of the total points compared to the other 2. He did miss obviously quite a few games with an injury, but he's back, and last week he scored a good, I think, 73 points without many attacking stats, which is always a good sign. If we can get center wings with a good floor, it really does give some reliability, and it means that when they do get those attacking stats, they have that capability to go really big. So he's averaging 60 in his couple of games, decent base with some good creative statistics and some good evasiveness, which means he's got decent tackle breaking ability and potentially ability to get line breaks too. Compare that to, say, Corey Thompson, who has got very similar base, but he's been a lot more reliant on getting points from tries. Now, the advantage of guys like Brian Kelly and Corey Thompson is that they both play on the left edge outside of Dave Fifita, who's been an absolute monster and wrecking ball for the Titans, so they really would benefit playing outside of him. He would attract so much attention that it really does give them the option and ability to be able to get easy tries. So I don't necessarily think that just because he's obviously scored a lot of points at the moment from scoring tries, I think it can still continue, and he's really, really sneaky pod, Corey Thompson, only owned by about 2%. He has gone quite up a bit in price though, so he's 533k, so that would also sway me towards Brian Kelly, who is a little bit cheaper, and he does have probably a bit more of a safer way in terms of getting his points. Although, to be fair though, Corey Thompson, he's got good tackle breaking ability too, as you can see there. He's got about an average of 26 points a game from evasiveness, but there would be some line breaks thrown in there too. But even that, that's a base and power of about 50, 55, which is a very, very good floor for a center wing. So I think those 2, you could really flip a coin. I'd probably flip towards Brian Kelly, given that he is a little bit cheaper at this point in time. Tyrone Peachey is really interesting as well, given that he does sometimes play, and most of the time he plays at lock for the Titans. He did play extended stint just recently, given the HIA to Philip Sami. Whether or not that will continue in terms of playing 80 minutes, we'll have to wait and see. His minutes were fluctuating up until that point, but he was still getting you decent base at about 40, and then I think he had a couple of games where he was getting 51. So he does also have a very good floor. As you can see, he was getting an average base of 41. He was also really good last week. He was able to set up a few tries, get a lot of forced dropouts. He was just getting points from a wide range of ways. So he's also a very good option and very low owned. That's one benefit of all these three Titans guys. They're very, very low owned at the moment, but I would expect that to go up in quite a bit over the next few weeks as more people start to bring them in for that round 13 benefit. But yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on those three. I think Tyron Peachy, there are some question marks on the minutes, and Corey Thompson, I'm not sure whether he can keep up that try scoring ability. So for that reason, I'd probably lean towards Brian Kelly. Paul Momirovski, playing with the Panthers, who are looking extremely attacking and very well drilled. Got a very, very good draw coming up, so I think he's a very good pod center wing option too. Some people might argue, is it too many Panthers? If you've got, say, like your likes of Charlie Staines, Brian To'o, Kurt Capewell, and then you added Momirovski, you potentially could have 4 center wings all from the same team. But I try to ignore that, to be honest, because I think at the end of the day, I think you're just picking the player, and if the player's numbers look good and their performance looks good, I think it doesn't matter if you've got, say, 6 or 7 players from the same team already. If they're the best team in the comp and they're playing like that, and all their players getting points, then I don't see any reason why you should be discouraged from that. He's offering pretty decent base as well of about 32. He's got decent tackle breaking ability, getting average about 23 points a game from tackle breaks and line breaks. The scoring is a little bit down. He's had a couple of games where I think he scored like 1 or a double, but again, he's been a pretty good cash cow as well. I think he was priced around the mid 300s at the start of the season, so he's made quite a bit of money too, but he is low owned. So if you really, really want to bet in on the Panthers, you could go for someone like Momirovski, but in my opinion, I don't know if I'd be going there myself. Next up, we've got the guys from the Dragons. We've got Jack Bird and Zach Lomax. Now, I'll just give my quick rundown of these two. Of the two, I would probably want to go with Zach Lomax, given that he doesn't really have the injury risk, I guess, that Jack Bird does, and he goal kicks too. He is obviously a lot more expensive, but I think we saw last year, given that he has that goal kicking, that does provide a bit of a buffer. If the Dragons do come up against a slightly tougher opponent, but they're able to still score a few points, he's still able to maybe get 12 to 16 points just from the goal kicking, and that really can then put the edge over him to say like a Jack Bird. His base is also better than Jack Bird's, which is a good sign. Obviously, the scoring is massively different given he has got that goal kicking. Doesn't quite have the tackle breaking or the try setting up ability, but playing outside of Ravalawa, it just probably hasn't come to him yet. But when they start getting a decent draw coming up, I could fully expect those points to come up too. I think with the Dragons, I think round 7 is about the time when their draw opens up, so he could be a good pickup at that point in time. The only downside with potentially with Zach Lomax is that I think at the moment he's playing into an Origin jersey, and if he plays obviously Origin, then this round 13 benefit doesn't really apply then. But either way, I think he's still a very good pickup to have in your centre wing and someone you can hold for the rest of the season. Blake Ferguson, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about him given that he had that really good 111 a couple of weeks back. Only got the 41 last week, but again, he's putting up some decent numbers, base of around 32, some decent tackle breaking and line breaks in there as well. The scoring as well, he's been able to score a few tries this season, which is a good indicator for any owners. He is obviously quite highly owned, about 21% of the game, but the Eels also do have a good draw coming into round 13, so I still think he is a decent pickup. He is very expensive though, given that you paid about $350 for him at the start of the season, and he's gone all the way up to $520, so it definitely works against him. But I still think he could potentially be good value, but I don't think I'd be going there myself personally, just given that he has gone that much up in price. Jermaine Osako I've got there because he's actually performed quite well, even did decently against tough opponents, but the Broncos draw coming up is really tough, and there's so many question marks over their overall attack. Testing you being dropped, and there's just so much rotation and change in that team. They're tinkering with the halves constantly. He does benefit and they plays fullback, so he's more likely to get better base than, say, playing on the wing or the centre, but even his base is not quite up to the standard of some of these other guys playing in the centres or even other wingers. So that does work against him. He has got the goal kicking, which does help, but the thing is, I don't really expect the Broncos to be putting on that many points over the next few games, given that they've got these tough games coming up. They're versing the Panthers this week and then the Eels next week. I think instead with Osako, if you do own him, I would probably be looking to sell. He's made quite a bit of money. You can bank that cash, flip sideways to say someone like a Blake Ferguson or a Zach Lomax, pocket the cash and see you later. So he's been good for that purpose, but I don't know how well he's going to go over the next few rounds. Justin Olam from the Storm. Obviously, you could also consider Raymond Smith, but I think of those two, I'd probably prefer Justin Olam. You know, he's priced a little bit cheaper than some of these other guys and a lot less owned too, about 8% of the game. He's kind of not really got the upside that I would say some of these other guys. You know, it's pretty steady, gets you around that 55 to 60 mark. If he does able to score a try in a game, he can get you into that 75 to 80, which does kind of maybe have a little bit less positive of a view on him compared to some of these other guys. But again, 60 points in average, you can't really sniff at that. Decent base of about 30. I think he really benefits from playing against those really weak oppositions, as we saw against, say, the Broncos. He had really strong, powerful running. He's able to break the line open and get obviously a lot of points in that way. Obviously, the Melbourne Storm are one of the best teams in the comp, so I don't think the opposition matters so much. But I think Justin Olam, decent pickup if you want to go for that in the centre wing. I would probably prefer, though, I think in my opinion, someone like Brian Kelly as an example. And finally, we've got David Nofoaluma. So I did tip Nofoaluma potentially as a bit of a punt captain last week, and I have tipped that potentially around round 8 is a good time to pick him up because that's when the draw does start to open up. But you know, with someone like Nofoaluma, he has got the ability to score tries in any game, and he's got a very, very good work rate. You know, averaging a base of about 30 a game. He has got very, very good tackle breaking ability. As you can see, his evasive numbers are quite high compared to some of these other guys, like even like an Olam, which is quite surprising. You know, when you see Olam, you think of the tackle breaking ability, but Nofoaluma even does better than him in that regard. The scoring has been okay. I think he scored 3 tries up until this point. But if they do start playing if they do start playing weaker opposition, you would expect that would improve as well. The only downside is that he didn't look that good, obviously, against the Cowboys, but you know, he potentially could just be a bit of a regression from last season. I think Nofoaluma was kind of like what Brett Morris is doing now, in that last season Nofoaluma just never went down in price, and it was very hard to pick him up. So we're probably expecting him to go on that 75-point average again. Probably won't happen again this season, but he's still a very, very solid centre wing. He's got that really solid base. And, you know, we always know that he's able to get the try line. He's a great finisher. So he's a very good pickup as well. But yeah, that's quite a breadth of centre wings. To be honest, if I had to pick, say, 2 of these guys, if you're looking to upgrade like a Kurt Capewell or a Tessie New, I'd actually probably go for like a Brian Kelly and probably maybe even a Zach Lomax. I think it does work against Lomax that he is playing Origin, but I really am impressed with how the Dragons are performing. And I really like Lomax as a player as well, so I'm probably a little bit swayed in that regard. But those would be my 2 pick of the bunch, but I don't think you can really go wrong with any of these guys, potentially except maybe Asako. I just kind of wanted to use him as an example of maybe someone to cash in on. So the next little thing I wanted to talk about was which cheapies to get for this week. There's only a few real kind of okay cheapies. I'm not really too impressed with the cheapies available this round. Sam Walker, I'm not going to really talk about him too much. If you don't have Sam Walker already in your halfback spot, he's a perfect downgrade candidate, given that he's got that minus 106 break even, and he's got an average of 85 at the moment in his first 2 games. So he's going to go shooting up in value, and he looks like a really good play in your 17 when the Roosters are versing the tough opposition. So if, say for example, this week he's versing the Storm, I wouldn't necessarily play him in this game. He doesn't really have any base statistics to speak of. He gets all his points from creative and attacking numbers, which you would expect would be down versing a good defense in the Storm. But yeah, don't have to talk too much more about Sam Walker. I think if you don't have him, you could potentially go to say like a Sean O'Sullivan, but he has already gone up in price. So I think for that reason, Sam Walker could be the one if you are looking to still do a downgrade there. Probably the most common kind of debate I think this week will be in the second row forward. Do I get Jackson Tapine or do I get Ben Condon? To be honest, I'm not really thrilled with either of these 2 guys. I think they've both got question marks over them. Tapine's on a development contract and I think Bulldogs constantly have to get exemptions from the NRL to keep him playing. So there's some question marks whether he's be able to stay with the team long term in terms of playing in their 17, that is. You know, he's looked okay on the eye, I think, when he plays, but, you know, his minutes have been a little bit down. He played good minutes in his first stint, but I think that was because of Lachlan Lewis going down with an injury, so Sione Katoa moved to 5'8", and so then he filled in at number 9. We saw last week, though, that his minutes were significantly down when Sione Katoa played the primary number 9 position. So that potentially does work against him. Ben Condon as well, like he has potentially got maybe a more secure place in the 17 for the Cowboys. But even with the Cowboys, Tom Gilbert, Cohen Hess are all kind of potentially fighting for that edge role. Tamalolo's come back, but Tamalolo plays in the middle, so I don't think that's going to affect his. I don't think that's going to affect Condon that much. And Josh Maguire has moved to the Dragons now, so that's one less forward. But even his numbers haven't been that great. He scored 35 in 80 minutes in his first game. And then in his second game, he scored 62, I think, in about 49 minutes, but that did include a try and I think a line break as well. In terms of his base, it was only like 19 points in base in 49 minutes, which really isn't that impressive. But to be honest, there are potentially some other second row forward cheapies coming down the line, like a Sean Bloor, who might come back for the Tigers outfit. But even with the Tigers, they've got pretty decent forward depth, so there's no guarantee that he also breaks into that starting lineup. So you could potentially, jump on Ben Condon, maybe make 50 to 100k out of him and switch down to Sean Bloor later. But I completely understand why people might want to get one of these two guys in. Like Jordan Ricky will probably be the very highly sold this week, given that he's named on the bench. And I think a lot of people will be looking to make money out of him to upgrade elsewhere, whether that's to get in like a Dave Fafita or a Brian To'o or any other gun center wing, or potentially get in like a Jerome Luai, for example. So I don't really begrudge someone going down to one of these two guys. If I had to pick one of the two, I would probably go with Condon, just given that at least he plays in the 17 and he's named in the 30, which Depine isn't. But again, I'm not thrilled with Condon, but I think he's probably the best cheapie in the second row forward this week, but not a great one. Finally, we've got Jake Simpkin, who was probably the surprise number 9 selection for the Tigers. Jacob Little being dropped out of the team. I'll put him here as potentially one to get in maybe next week or the week after. He's only come in for the first week this week, so there's no need to rush him into your team. Unless you do have Jacob Little and you're looking to create money, you could potentially go Jacob Little to Simpkin to make the money, but very easily we could see Jacob Little come back into the team next week, and then you've wasted that trade. So if you can avoid it, I would definitely wait and see on Simpkin before bringing him into your team. So for the rest of the video, we'll just go through every team's kind of players, break evens and prices. I won't try to spend too much time on each of these, given that I've already spent quite a bit of time talking on those other two sections, but let's get into it. I think the burning question for the Broncos will be Jordan Ricky and Tessie New, obviously. With Ricky, I think it's okay to sell. Being named on the bench, he has kind of peaked. His break even is let me just look at it there. It's 51. He was kind of averaging around the mid 50s as well, so he has basically peaked. And I think naming on the bench, he's really going to kind of have a decrease in his output you would expect and his points, and he's going to start leaking cash at that point. So I think he's definitely a good candidate to sell. It is a shame because obviously he's been a good cash cow for us, and the Broncos do play round 13, so you would hope that you could hold him until that point. But I think if he's continually named on the bench, he's a sell. Tessie New doesn't necessarily have to be a sell this week, given that he's dropped out of the 17 altogether. He's not going to play. His price isn't actually going to change at all, so if you can maybe avoid and not have to trade him, that's perfectly fine to do so. I think Ricky would be the priority of the two, but I completely understand people selling Tessie New to try to get up to those gun center wings, or even to your second row forward if you've got the right dual players. For me, potentially, I haven't even, to be honest, worked out what my trades are going to be at this point in time. I think Ricky will probably be definitely someone I'm going to go trade out of my team. But whether it's to like a cheapie like Condon, or if I try to get up to like a Jazz Tavanga or something, I haven't really fully decided yet. So Tessie New might still be in my team this week, but I don't think he's a priority sell, but I completely understand why. I think if the fact that he's dropped out of the team isn't a good sign, so I think he's fine to sell as well. And Osako, I'd probably also echo the same. Tough draw coming up, as you can see, against Panthers, Eels, and then Titans. So he's basically kind of peaked in price. Osako, he's got a break even of 90, pretty high. So I think he's good to sell as well and bank the cash. Next up with the Bulldogs, again, not too many players to consider. I think Topine we've kind of discussed. I've given my thoughts already. Josh Jackson, it is unfortunate. He's actually potentially out for the next 3 to 6 weeks, so he is definitely a sell if anyone still does own him. I think in terms of what that might do to the other Bulldogs forwards, I've kind of had a thought as to maybe someone like Adam Elliott, who's actually put up decent numbers. But I think overall with the Bulldogs, I just kind of want to wait and see maybe how Jackson's injury, how that kind of changes the minutes for some of these forwards. If it looks like one forward really substantially increases their minutes and their output, I might give them a look. But at this point in time, not really considering anyone at the Bulldogs. With the Cowboys, again, not so much discussion here. I think the real kind of burning question for this week would be Ben Condon, and I've given my thoughts on him already. Potentially you could go for someone like a Val Holmes. The draw for the next 4 games is not too bad for the Cowboys. They've got Bulldogs, Warriors and Broncos in their next 4, which is pretty decent. So you could potentially go real pod for someone like Val Holmes, but that is a big risk. We've only seen one example of the Cowboys attack firing at the moment, and that was last week against the Tigers. So I think it's still okay to wait and see on them. So Dragons, a bit of interest here as well. They've just announced that they've signed Josh Maguire from the Cowboys. So what that does potentially to some of those Supercoach assets. Terrell Fulmiona, he has kind of peaked in price in my opinion. He's at 300k and he's got a break even of about 31. You could potentially, just get to that or a little bit over, but with Josh Maguire coming into the team, he hasn't been named in the 17, but I think come match day he potentially might be. And playing in the middle, that might affect Fulmiona's minutes and then definitely his output. So I don't really expect too many more cash rides out of him, or substantial ones for that matter. So I think Fulmiona is okay to sell, potentially go down to your Condon, or potentially use him as an upgrade to like a big gun second row forward, like a Tohu Harris, Crichton, Dave Fifita. Zach Lomax kind of touched on him as well, as to maybe is when the best time to get him. Round 8 will be that West Tigers game. So they've got the Tigers and the Bulldogs back to back. I think there is a tough game against the Storm just after that, but from my memory, the games after that are not too bad. They do play round 13, but I think Lomax potentially might be playing Origin, but that West Tigers game is definitely when I'm potentially looking to bring in Zach Lomax. Similar with Jack Bird, benefits obviously with the same decent draw, but he's got decent stats, but I think I do prefer some other centre wings. With the Eels, bit of a mixed bag here in terms of their draw, Raiders and Roosters in the next 4, which is tough, but then in between that, great games against the Broncos and the Bulldogs. Papali'i is probably the only guy he is the only guy who's got a negative break even, so he's set to go up in value again this round. He does look very good, but with Madison being named in the 13, Papali'i was named back on the bench. Obviously with Madison, that's happened in the past couple of weeks and he was ruled out, so we might easily see Papali'i get back to the starting lineup. If Papali'i is a consistent starter, I think he's a fantastic option. He's looked really good for them, not just in his work rate, but he has shown he's got some attacking potential. He's scored in back-to-back games now, but definitely something I'd wait and see on the match, on the team list before maybe jumping on Papali'i. But if you're looking for a cash grab, to be honest, I think he's actually a very good buy. I like how he looks in real life, but if he is consistently coming off the bench down the line, that's not really great for his Supercoach points. Talking about Madison, he is obviously named, but to be honest, I'd probably sell at this point. Yes, you have held until this point, so you could argue I can keep him for another week. With every passing week, it's more and more likely that he comes back, but there's just so much uncertainty. I think the last time he had a big concussion, it was like 6 weeks he was out for. And the Eels obviously look very cautious with him. So just given that uncertainty and the price that he's at, he's also got a high break even. His break even is 145. So unless he pulls out like a couple of tries, it's really hard to see him match that. He's going to go down in value. So I think if you have held to this long, it is a bit of a shame. But I think when you got guys like Crichton, Tohu Harris, Fifita all performing very well, I think at that point, I think you just kind of have to get rid of him and hope that you can get him back later, come round 13. Dylan Brown, obviously, is a bit of a pod, but I'll touch on him since he is in my team and what I'm going to do with him. Unfortunately, he's got a 1 week suspension, so he's not going to be playing this game. I have toyed up with potentially just trading him to Jerome Luai, because Jerome Luai's got a fantastic matchup against the Broncos this week. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't know if I want to start burning trades just for like these 1 week suspensions. And Dylan Brown, he hasn't set the world alight, but again, Eels do play round 13, and their draw coming up is pretty good. Yes, he might miss this week, but then he's coming back against the Broncos and the Bulldogs, which is, to be honest, probably the 2 teams that I'd want him for. So I'm not quite sure if I'm going to do that move to Luai. It is tempting, obviously, to get Luai, but I also feel like Luai potentially might be playing Origin. Yes, Origin is a long time away, and there's going to be a lot of points earned in that time, but I think at the moment I'm going to be holding him. I think I can't really be using too many trades in the long term, just kind of bringing these guys in and out, because I think I would want him from round 13. So I don't think I'm going to be trading him in and out. I think he's just going to stay in my team. With the Knights, one very distinct thing with them is their draw coming up. They've benefited from a pretty decent draw up until this point, but as you can see from round 7 it gets pretty tough. Panthers, Roosters and the Raiders in the next month. So and in terms of some of their attacking guys, like your Kalen Pongas, for example, I don't think there's any rush to bring him into your team. He's only just coming back from injury. He got a 66 last week, which is a decent score, but that included a try, and that's well below his break even. So don't think there's any rush to get him into the team. Say with someone like a Bradman Best, obviously Bradman Best is going to be a gun centre wing in my opinion, but with those tough games coming up, you'd expect potentially his points to go down a little bit. So I think someone like Bradman Best, I wouldn't expect him to be playing Origin this year. So I think after these tough games do end, from memory, their draw is pretty decent come around 13, around that Origin period. So I think he's a very good pickup at that point. Connor Watson, I think a lot of people potentially be looking to trade him soon just to kind of get that cash, get the cash in the bank from him, basically. Fortunately for him, Kurt Mann has returned to the nice lineup, so that means Connor Watson has been named a lock again. Fully expect him to come from the bench again though, but he has shown that from the bench he has got very good points capability. He very easily can get into the 60 to 65, can even crack the ton. So very good to see that. To be honest, I think that means that he's a decent hold up until the round 13 period. Unless you want to kind of go for potentially say like Jake Simpkin shows that he's a really, really good cash cow option, then I think you could potentially do that Connor Watson to Jake Simpkin move. But I think if you can avoid it, I don't think he's an immediate priority sell. There's probably people who've got other issues like your Jordan Rickies, for etc. So I don't think he's a priority sell unless you're kind of maybe wanting to eventually go to your gun hooker like your Harry Grant, or gun 5'8", like a Jerome Luai, Cameron Munster, for example. Similar argument with Barnett. I think a lot of people will be thinking, oh, he's not goal kick anymore, so is he a keeper? Don't necessarily think he's a season-long keeper now without the goal kicking, but I think he's still a very good play. And I think my kind of thinking with him is that I'll hold him until round 13. At that point in time, I'll probably flip him, hopefully maybe to like a Tohu Harris or Angus Crichton if I haven't got him back in at that point in time. Because I think playing on this left edge, Bradman Best, Kalen Ponga, yes, they have got some tough games, but after that, hopefully those easy games mean he gets some attacking stats. And even in the game against the Titans last week where the Knights didn't really have much ball, he scored 53, which is, still respectable. So I don't think he's an immediate sell, and I think it's fine to hold. Only situation that I would sell him is if he was a stepping stone to Dave Fifita. So for the Panthers, kind of have discussed their draw coming up when I was talking about Paul Moravsky in the centres. As you can see there, it looks like a dream run for the next month or so. Broncos, Knights, Sea Eagles and Sharks. Very, very good game for the Panthers. So Matt Burton, I had kind of touched on last week if he was a good option. He's still a decent option. I think Dylan Edwards he's still tipped, come back in round 8. So it's actually maybe only a couple of weeks for Matt Burton. So he should still make some decent coin. He's obviously got a minus 19 break even, but just do keep in mind that if you do get him in, there'll be a short-term kind of play there until Dylan Edwards comes back, but he will become relevant again around that State of Origin period, because you'd expect Cleary obviously is going to play for the Blues. Matt Burton you would think would slide into that number 7 role. Charlie Sanders still got as a should we hold. I think a lot of people will be looking to hold. He had a good score last week finally, we saw against the Raiders, so he's got a break even of 2, so he's looking to go up in value quite a bit. Hopefully he can get to that 400 450k mark. At that point you can potentially upgrade, but with this round 13 advantage that the Panthers have, I think he'll probably be a hold up until that point. In terms of some of the other guys, Brian To'o, number 1 centre wing in my opinion, just get him in. Spencer Leniu has got a break even of 18, so he's looking to go up in value still for the next few weeks, which is very good for us. James Fisher-Harris only got a break even of 40, 530k. I think he's a good pickup around that State of Origin period too. He has put up some decent scores. I think he's had one big score where he got a 90. That did come with some attacking stats, which you normally wouldn't expect from him. He's normally just pure base, but his base is pretty decent. I think he's averaging about 50 to 55 in base this season. So with the Rabbitohs, they have kind of benefited from a decent draw up until this point, versus the Broncos and the Bulldogs, and they've got the Tigers this week, so that's another good game for them. It does start to toughen up though. They've got the Titans, Raiders and the Storm in the 3 games after the Tigers. So potentially for some attacking guys, guys I think probably loaded up on say maybe their backs, like your Alex Johnson, Dane Gagai, they're still decent holds in my opinion. Disadvantage with the Rabbitohs is that they don't play in the round 13 bye. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're sells. The Rabbitohs are a very good attacking team and can still score a lot of points. We saw even in round 1 against the Storm, they were able to score, 18? And that was just purely in the second half. Cam Murray, I think, is a big kind of talking point out of the Rabbitohs. I think a lot of people would have jumped on him pre-season. He's putting a very good base. I think his base is about 50 to 55 a game, but he's just not getting the attacking stats. And that's, I think, a lot of people with Cam Murray would want the attacking stats. That's kind of the appeal of getting him. I kind of said last week that, if you've held for this long, I would stick, just given that he's dropped so much in value. I'd say the same argument holds true for this week. His break even is 85, so at the way that he's going, I don't even think that he's going to meet that, to be honest, and he's going to keep leaking cash. But you won't lose the cash until you sell him, basically. I'd still hold, but if he was your way to get to Dave Fifita, I would just advocate that move, because I think just cut your losses in that point and just bank the points, because to be honest, Murray just hasn't really been too impressive so far, and it's been a shame because he has been a past Supercoach gun. Damien Cook, I'll kind of repeat what I said from last week as to when to get him in. I think the volatility that he's showing really concerns me. It doesn't concern me because it obviously means he's got that high upside score, and you want to be on for those high upside scores. Maybe just me, I'm more conservative. Potentially I just like more consistent guys. So I think with Damien Cook, I don't think I'm going to be really looking to get him in probably post State of Origin. You know, they've got these tough games coming up. Doesn't play the round 13 bye, and will miss games from Origin. So I think for me, probably going to steer clear. With the Raiders, some few considerations here. I think the main one, talking point at least out of this team this Tuesday, was Ryan James being dropped out of the 17 altogether. Don't quite know actually yet why that's the case, whether that's some kind of injuries and they're just resting him, or if he's been dropped out of the side altogether. I wouldn't think it was related to performance. I think he's been quite good. He did cop that really bad head knock, so that potentially could just be maybe why they're being extra cautious with him. But, you know, he's got a break even at 13, so I don't think, yes, he's not playing, but given that you've got guys probably like Jordan Ricky who are going to be still playing, but they're playing off the bench, so with less points, I think they're more of a priority sell compared to, say, a Ryan James. He's got a break in with 13, so if he does come back into that 17, you know, you'd expect him to go above that, and he hopefully does kick on and make a few more dollars for us. But yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. I won't be trading Matt this week, but if I see some news that he's continually being left out of the side, then at that point you just kind of have to sell. Josh Hodgson, I think, has done pretty well for some of his owners. You know, he's made about 100k, I think, in value, but he's got a break even of 77. And the Raiders draw coming up is a bit mixed. You know, Eels is tough, Cowboys is good though, and as is the Knights, it's okay. But then they've got the Rabbitohs too. So I think at 467k, you know, he's okay to sell. To be honest, I think you can sell to like maybe a Jaden Brayley, maybe a Reed Marnie, or to be honest, you could even just go really gung-ho, go straight for Harry Grant if you want. That is a ballsy move, given that Harry Grant's only just coming back from his injury and has been named again on the bench, but he might be named to start this week. We're not quite sure yet, but you could definitely make a move like that. That would be a really real pod move, but Hodgson has kind of done his job. He's made some money for you, but I think it's okay to sell. Bailey Simonson, I kind of mentioned last week as well. You know, he's only averaging around the mid-30s, hasn't been able to score a try yet, but break even of 29, I'm just kind of holding hope that he scores some tries. I think he's okay to keep at this point in time. I think people probably have bigger priorities in their centre wing. You know, if you've got a Fusitu'a, James Roberts, I think they're a bigger sell candidate than Bailey Simonson. In terms of the buys, I've seen a couple of people who've mentioned if they want to be getting in Jordan Rapana into their centre wing. Break even of 76, and with this tough game against the Eels, I don't think he's necessarily a trade-in. He's been a little bit inconsistent for mine as well, so I don't think I'd be going there myself. But, you know, if you wanted to go with a big pod move, you could potentially go there. One also notable person who I actually haven't mentioned in that burning questions is Caleb Aikens. He's been named at fullback in replacement of Charles Nicoll-Klokstad. And, you know, I think he's priced about 280k, and he's dual listed at centre wing fullback. So potentially if you don't make any changes to your centre wing and he goes really well this week and the next week, you could then maybe bring him in and profit on the cash. I think Nicoll-Klokstad's injury is about 4 to 8 weeks potentially. Definitely to keep an eye out for news on that. Follow NRL Physio. He's the best guy in the business in terms of the injuries and potential recovery times. So definitely good to check him out. But yeah, it looks like potentially he might have an extended stint on the sideline. So Caleb Aikens could be a good buy if he does perform well this week and next. With the Roosters, I don't think there's really too much to touch on. I think Sam Walker obviously got that really, really low break even, so definitely get him in. Even if he's versus Storm, he's going to go up in value heaps. Ben Marshke is also another one who a couple of people have asked me about, you know, a cheapie at the hooker position. I think he has got this pending thing at the judiciary over a crusher tackle. Obviously, if he gets guilty of that, he'll miss, I think, 2 games. So at that point in time, he doesn't become an immediate buy. I think, in my opinion, I'd probably prefer Simpkin as my cheapie hooker, though. Just based on what I've heard about the way that Simpkins performed at New South Wales Cup and in the reserves. He seems like he's a pretty, like, a star of the future, similar to maybe like a Sam Walker. So I think he could potentially have a bit of a, bigger impact as a cash cow than, say, Ben Marshke. Because there are, he's not the first choice. Obviously, number 9, you got guys like Victor Radley who potentially might fill in, Sam Verrills. But I think Sam Verrills has had a bit of a setback potentially as well. So he could, based on how the other number 9s around the Roosters pull up, he could be decent, but definitely just wait on those news from the judiciary. In terms of guys to buy, I think obviously Brett Morris is exceedingly expensive, so it'd be hard to buy him, but if you can get him into your team, decent shout. But they've got tough games against the Storm and the Eels. Daniel Tupou, though, is someone I'm definitely eyeing up. He's got a break even of he's got a break even of 69, and he's been leaking cash quite a bit. I think hopefully he does bottom out in price soon, and he could be a good pickup after round 13 because the Roosters do buy in that week. And then, he's always been a good Supercoach player with a very good base. And, if he's able to get on the end of some tries too, he really has got that potential to go big in terms of his overall points. So he's definitely a buy, but someone I'm going to be keeping an eye on that price and his break-evens throughout the next few weeks. With the Sea Eagles, I think the big inclusion of Tom Trbojevic will have a lot of people kind of thinking, oh, should I get him in straight away? Teddy's got that high break-even of 153. Manly's games coming up are not too bad. You know, Titans, Tigers, and the Warriors, although a game against the Panthers as well. So should you be getting a Turbo? Personally, for me, I think it's too much of a risk for me at least. You know, he's just coming back from a hamstring injury, so I'd personally maybe just kind of wait and see on how he performs. You know, I don't think it's an immediate trade, and you know, we've got likes of Teddy, Pappy, Latrell, who are all gun fullbacks at the moment, so I don't think there's any real need to rush in Turbo into your teams. But he is at a very enticing price. If he's got good signs that he's, you know, back to his best, then I think it's at that point it's okay to bring him in. Jason Saab, I think, really potentially does benefit from Tommy Turbo coming in. He had a good score last week, and he's got a break even of let me see it here. It is 23. So 23 is actually achievable, you'd expect for a normal centre wing, but Saab has shown that he's got a 5 in his game. But you know, potentially he falls over for a few tries, and that really gets his cash ticking upwards and in the right direction. So I don't think he's really a sell. I think Tessinu would be a bigger sell, James Roberts and Fusatua. Saab has gone down in price all the way to 197, so I think it's okay to just keep him in and hope that he gets a few attacking stats. Cherry Evans, probably the last guy I wanted to touch on, whether he's now a relevant option again with the return of Tommy Turbo. Look, I think he showed last week that he has got the capability to get good points. You know, he scored 83. He's got a break even of 82 though, so there's no need to rush him in as well, given that Tommy Turbo's back as well. It's just really hard to kind of break up that Nathan Cleary, Sam Walker combo, in my opinion. So I just don't really know how I'm going to get him into my team. It really, to me, it kind of depends on injuries/suspensions before I'd be looking to get him in. So next up with the Sharks, I think there's a few kind of players potentially people might want to be considering down the line. Siosifa Talakai, who I had in my team for so long last season, and you know, I was just sitting him in my centre wing, and then towards the end of the season he became an absolute gun. So I've got a bit of a soft spot for him. He's not actually named in this list of player prices and break evens, but he's just been named in the 17. He's got the capability to be a true centre wing gun. I think he is this year dual listed as well, so that is a big plus for us. But I think that's someone that you can consider more long term. Teague Wilton is probably the guy I think a lot of people will be looking at. You know, he's got a minus 20 break even, and it looks like with Wade Graham going down with that HIA, you know, it looks like from his comments he's playing it week to week as to when he wants to return back to the field. So there is a bit of a risk potentially that, say, if Wade Graham does come back, say next week, Teague Wilton might get out of the back row, but at least he's got a starting role for this week. So, you know, if you just wanted to go for a quick cash grab, you could bring him in. You know, Britton Cora's come back, but he's still got a starting role, Teague Wilton, that is. But I think you kind of maybe potentially missed the boat, given that I think it was 250k last week. So he's gone up about $60,000 already. Potentially it does work against him, but I think if you are still in the market, potentially just making some cash, you could go with Teague Wilton. You know, obviously with Wade Graham, I think it was a couple of HIAs in a couple of weeks, so it was kind of close together. That might potentially mean it's more than just a week. You could gamble on that, but it is a bit of a risk. I don't think I'm going to be going there myself. So next up with the Storm, not really kind of a question, but more on Pappenhausen. He definitely has potential to get to the $1 million mark. You know, he's got a -2 break even. I think if he just scores another 100+ score, we might see it. So yeah, look, I still think he's a good buy. You know, even though the Storm do play round 13, you'd expect Pappenhausen's locked up the number 14 role for the New South Wales Blues. But still think with the goal kicking, he's got tremendous upside, as we've seen. I think he's now got 3 scores over 100 in the first 5 weeks, so definitely still look to get him in team if you can. But I understand $830,000 is a big price to pay. Justin Olam, I kind of touched on him before in my centre wing portion of the video. Still think he's a decent buy with decent base, and playing around 13 is advantageous. Warriors and Sharks could be good games for the Storm, but I think, to be honest, with the Storm, you can kind of ignore the game to an extent, given just how good they are. They can score points against anyone. And finally, Brandon Smith, he's probably someone I think a few people still might have in their team. I think at this point he's a sell. He's got a high break even of 82, and Harry Grant has, you know, is back in the team and potentially could be replacing him at starting number 9 come kickoff on Friday night. So I think Brandon Smith is a sell at this point. You know, you've got some options around his price, like you can go like maybe a Jazz Tavanga for a bit of a pod. Otherwise, if you've got cash in the bank, you know, you could do a Ricky downgrade to a cheapie, upgrade Brandon Smith to a Tohu Harris, Angus Crichton. That'd be my kind of approach with him. So with the Titans, I won't spend too much time talking about them. I think I've kind of covered off, you know, Dave Fifita. I feel like I don't really have to talk about him too much. You know, get him into your team. He's just looking like potentially the number 1 second row forward. And I've talked about which centers I would go for. Maybe if I could just talk about maybe say Tino, he's got a break even of 69, which is pretty high. But I still think I'm happy to stick with Tino. He showed us that in the week before last, he scored 93 without scoring a try. They've got good games coming up, so you know he really could potentially get some attacking stats, which he really hasn't gotten yet. I think last week he was just kind of disadvantaged from that Philip Sami HIA. He just got pushed to an edge, potentially even to the centres at some point, and the ball just went down the other side to Dave Fifita. So I think it is a bit of a shame. That's a bit of a roller coaster with him. I mean, potentially, if Tino was the one to make way for Fifita, I would probably advise that, just given how good Fifita is looking. But, if you've got the pair of them, I don't think it's any reason to sell Tino. I think he's still an okay hold. That dual flexibility can really come in handy as well down the line. With the Warriors, pretty decent games coming up after the Storm. Cowboys and Sea Eagles is not a bad 2-game run there. David Fusitu'a, I've got him in my center wing. If you want to sell him, I think that's completely advisable. He's injured, he's out for 2 to 4 weeks. At least he won't kind of lose any more value. He's got a break even of 37, and he's been averaging in say the mid-20s, so it's probably a blessing potentially for Supercoach at least. Obviously for him, I wouldn't wish injury on anyone, but at least we know that his price isn't going to change for Supercoach. So I think you can still wait a week or two. He's definitely someone I'm looking to potentially trade out in the next week or two. If I can make the cash, potentially even upgrade him to an absolute gun center wing, or even an Angus Crichton for my second row forward. 2 gunner guys who I think would be potential pod buys would be Bunty Afoa and Jazz Tavanga. Bunty Afoa, he's shown that with extended minutes, he has got some decent output. 53 base in 57 minutes last week. Sorry, not last week. In his last game, he was suspended for the last 2. I think no Adam Fanua-Blake really could benefit his minutes. Same with Jazz Tavanga. He played 57 minutes and he's got 68 in base. Absolutely unreal. He's an absolute workhorse. He loves to offload as well. His break even though is pretty manageable. He's got a break even of let me see it here. It's 59. So even if he scores say another 65 to 70, his price won't change too much. So I think it's still okay to wait and see, and just to kind of reassure yourself if that 82 is just a flash in the pan, or if that's something you can consistently expect from him. Finally, on the Tigers, I think the big question from them will be Jacob Liddle and what to do with him. Look, it really is unfortunate that he got axed. I think it's kind of maybe potentially undeserved, but that's just what the coaches felt. I think it is a lot of money to be keeping on your bench, without even providing points. It's 390k. Potentially you could hold this week just in case he comes back next week, and because his break even is only 11, so if he plays another game he'd go up in value still for maybe 1 or 2 more times. But I completely understand people selling him. One move that I potentially have seen people do is that they still got Connor Watson in their 5'8", so they're trading Jacob Liddle, switching Connor Watson up to their hooker, and instead of Liddle they're getting in a gun 5'8", like a Jerome Luai. I think that's a great trade and one I would probably do. I've seen some people go from say Jacob Liddle down to James Simpkin. I think that's maybe a little bit too early on that, given that it's only the first game for Simpkin. What if, for example, he plays his first game, hypothetically gets injured, Jacob Liddle comes back, and you're stuck with Jake Simpkin, who's not making you any money, and you've lost Jacob Liddle, and you have to buy him back at his higher price. So I think there's a bit of risk in doing that particular move. I would maybe wait and see 1 more week on that. If Simpkin looks like he's got better job security. But yeah, that'd be my kind of strategy with Jacob Liddle. Nofoaluma, kind of touching him already in the center portion of the video. I think round 7's a decent time for the Tigers to jump on them, because they've got the Sea Eagles at that point in time. Adam Doueihi, I've mentioned him previously. He's looking like a great pod. He's pretty expensive actually. He's 560k, but he's got a 3-round average around the 90s, goal kicking as well. Look, I think he could be a great consideration at 5'8". It's just a really stacked position, and it's really hard to kind of fit him into your team. But if you love chasing pods, I think he potentially could be the one to go for at 5'8". Alright everyone, those are my round 6 trade targets. Just want to kind of change it up a little bit, talk a little bit more about the center wings and the cheapies. I think a lot of people looking at the center wings this week, and in general just looking at the team's breakdowns, players and their break evens, I think is always a good exercise to kind of pinpoint potentially when it's a good time to pick up certain players. Hopefully if you guys did enjoy this video, would really appreciate a thumbs up on it. Do please consider subscribing as well if you haven't done so already. As I mentioned, my goal is to try to get to 500 subscribers by State of Origin Game 1. If I can get to 1,000 by the end of the season, that'd be truly amazing, and I'd really appreciate you guys for that. But until then, see you guys in the next video.